A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
We find ourselves with a majority Labor government, with the Prime Minister reportedly saying that Labor is the party of opportunity and reclaiming the political centre. He suggests that being at the centre is part of his government's strategy to appeal to a broad range of voters by balancing progressive and moderate views. So how might this apply to issues around Australia's freedoms? Freedom of conscience, freedom of association, religious freedom, freedom of speech, academic freedom, and freedom of political communication. Now, our special guest today is Mike Southon. He's back with us. He leads Freedom for Faith. They coordinated those Meet the Candidate forums in the lead up to the federal election. Mike Southon thinks the next 18 months will be critical in cementing religious freedom commitments. Freedom for Faith is a Christian legal think tank that exists to see religious freedom protected and promoted in Australia. Mike Southon, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. It's always great to be with you.
Hey, Mike, let me start just with, the sort of general impression, the outcome of the election. I don't think anyone in our commentary team the other day that you were a part of was really anticipating what did happen. What were your thoughts?
Well, it was quite a resounding victory for Labor. What the biggest fear really that was being talked about was a minority government. What if Labor is dependent on Greens? What if Labor is dependent on independents? We don't have that to worry about in the lower house. So I do think, there's a lot of conversations I have about quality of campaign and all these sorts of things, but I do think we have ended up with a government which will be much easier to work with than some of the other combinations that we could have seen.
From some of the things I've read and some of the things I've seen, it does appear that Anthony Albanese is taking a little bit more of a statesman approach to his prime ministership. Is that a positive, do you think?
Yeah, there's Albanese comes out of New South Wales, which is the most multicultural and multi-faith state in Australia. He has always understood that Labor politics needs to be moderated so that they can win those seats in Western Sydney and Western Melbourne, which are so multi-faith and multicultural. So I do think that his approach to politics is it's definitely something we can work with. And he has shown over the past 3 years in issues of religious freedom a willingness to actually hear when we say, hey, here's a significant concern. Hasn't always worked, but in many cases, we have actually got Labor to listen, step back, change what they're doing.
Okay, there is a listening ear. There's a positive there, and we'll get to some of the commitments that you heard being made in the lead up to the election. But stay with the new parliament for a few moments, because the Greens are still going to have a very strong presence in the Senate. They might be reduced in numbers in the lower house, but in the Senate, they will hold an absolute balance of power. What do you think that might mean for the freedoms that we talk about over the coming times?
We'll talk about the commitments we got from Labor in a second, but really it means we are dependent on Labor. Labor need to hold to their promises. They need to listen to us. If Labor decides that they want to ram through a highly progressive attack on religious freedom, they will be able to do so because there is no check in the Senate. They and the Greens could, in theory, gang up to do all sorts of horrendous things. However, what we need to keep reminding Labor is if you do that, that will be the last time you see government for an extended period of time.
Now, in your role and responsibility, you deal with government, and no doubt you're knocking on the door of the Attorney General because you're talking all of these different legal aspects of what it is that makes our freedoms viable and relevant here in Australia. The high likelihood, and I think these things are beginning to settle, and maybe even settling as we speak, but there's the expectation that Mark Dreyfus, the Attorney General, is to be booted out of the Albanese new ministry. There are, I guess there's a number of replacements. One I have heard as a possibility, Sam Ray. But I guess whoever it will be, you'll no doubt be wanting to knock on the door of the new Attorney General.
Oh, absolutely. The Attorney General's office, the way that Albanese runs his government, he's very cabinet focused. So he lets the Attorney General run what the Attorney General's focused on. He lets each minister run their department and usually doesn't interfere in a great way. So Dreyfus's personality was far more important in the past 3 years in negotiating on religious freedom issues than Albanese's was in that way. And we have found the Attorney General at times to be not as sympathetic to our concerns as other members of the government. So we are looking forward to having an Attorney General who will have a more open door, more able to have a conversation with. We had attempts, so senior faith leaders, we're talking Anglican and Catholic archbishops, Muslim imams, etc., collaborating together, asking the Mark Dreyfus for a meeting on issues of religious freedom and having difficulties getting through the door. So we are really hopeful that whoever is the next Attorney General will have a more open door and more willing to listen.
I guess it might be important as to which faction the new Attorney General comes from, whether they come from the left faction in the Labor Party or the right faction. That I'm not even sure how that looks by way of, whether there's a common way of addressing things like religious freedom. But whatever faction the new Attorney General comes from, that will be important.
Well, I think even more important is what state they come from, because Mark Dreyfus was Victorian right. And the reality is there is such a difference between New South Wales Labor and Victorian Labor that on average the New South Wales left can be more conservative than the Victorian right. So the parties do really think very differently state by state. I am praying for somebody who comes out of New South Wales or maybe South Australia or some of the more conservative Labor factions who have spent a lot of time working with faith communities and listening to us. That would be a really good outcome.
Mike, I mentioned that you were the one coordinating a wonderful number of Meet the Candidate forums in the lead up to the federal election, and these were happening all over Australia in different electorates. And from what I understand, a great turnout, and there was some level of method in the madness, a motivation from you that anyone who stands up at a Meet the Candidate forum is going to make some levels of commitment. And you had people from just, raw, fresh candidates right up to senior ministers who appeared at some of these candidate forums. What was it that you glean from some of the statements that were made around religious freedoms that we might be able to, understand?
Yeah, so these candidate forums, which were held by churches across the state, but we helped them run them and helped them shape the questions they were going to ask. And we told both major parties ahead of time, hey, all these forums are happening across the country. They're all going to be asking about religious freedom. You need to have good answers for your candidates. And so what we saw was, as you said, senior ministers and Green MPs all being given commitments by the major parties and saying, this is what you can say. This is what we're committing to. So these weren't just off-the-cuff comments. This was the party coming up with a studied response. The coalition, as you would expect, gave some quite strong support on religious freedom. They particularly were full-throated in their support for faith-based organisations being able to employ based on faith, and they committed that the protections that we have and the religious freedom that we have will not go backwards, and they will protect us. Labor also made most of those promises, but in the issue of a religious discrimination bill, on the issue of faith-based schools and institutions being able to employ, the commitment they made was that anything that they did would be bipartisan. That is, they would work with the coalition to come up with legislation and not cut a deal with the Greens. To quote Labor, they said, we continue to believe that these reforms should be progressed on a bipartisan basis to ensure they are enduring, unifying, and fit for purpose. So that's actually a really helpful commitment. As we say, we're walking into a parliament where Labor and the Greens could cut any deal they want and shove it through the Parliament. Labor have committed that they will not do this on religious freedom issues. They will work with the coalition and with faith leaders to come up something with it, which is, in their words, unifying and fit for purpose.
And some might be a little cynical, saying they're unlikely to have some level of bipartisan approach to all of this, because the likelihood is that left and right will be at loggerheads over these sorts of issues, and whether it's the major core elements or whether it's those peripheral issues, is this something that we're likely to see just simmering along without anything actually happening? I said in the introduction that you've been saying that this next 18 months will be very, very important. Is there likely to be any sort of bipartisan support for religious freedom?
Well, famously, the last meeting between Labor and Liberal on a religious discrimination bill between Attorney General Mark Dreyfus and Shadow Attorney General Michaelia Cash, that meeting broke down within 5 minutes, with Michaelia Cash leaving the room, objecting to her description of Mark Dreyfus's behaviour. It is quite possible that we have complete status quo, that we have stagnation on the issue of religious freedom over the next 3 years. We are actually hopeful that we, as combined faith leaders, can work together, create a bill and bring it to both parties and say, this is what we want. Why don't you both agree and give us and create the legislation that we both want? We are still very hopeful for that. But so long as so long as both parties keep their promises, at very least we can say that we're not going to be going backwards, which is better than we have been able to say over even the past 15 years. Importantly, that's at a federal level. I think the most important part of the next 18 months is going to be at state level legislation, particularly leading up to the Victorian election, particularly things that are happening in New South Wales and Western Australia as we speak. And we'll get on and talk about that later. But for federal, I think the most important thing for us to do now is to teach Labor that there is real electoral value in keeping your promises to faith communities. People writing letters to their MPs, signing petitions, telling Albanese, we heard your promise, thank you for your promise, now keep it.
A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Our talkback line open, 1800 316 316. You can text us on 0447 488 316. Go to the Vision app and open the Vision stream. You'll see two little buttons there. One says call, one says text. You don't even have to remember the numbers. Hey, our special guest is Mike Southon. He leads Freedom for Faith. We are talking about freedoms here in Australia and what is ahead with the re-elected Albanese government. One of the things I mentioned just before the break there, Mike, was this new, or I should say relaunched, petition on religious freedom. This has already gleaned quite a substantial following last time when it was current. You've relaunched it now because it's obviously coming into a fresh new time when particularly listeners to our conversation today might need to participate in this. Tell us about this petition.
Yeah, so the petition was launched leading up to the election, and it was calling on Prime Minister Albanese and Opposition Leader Dutton to make public and strong commitments on religious freedom. Following the election, it's been relaunched with exactly the same requests for commitments. However, we can't put Mr. Dutton's name on the petition. But in addition, we are saying, dear Prime Minister Albanese, we are asking you to keep your promises and commit to protecting religious freedom. So it is actually very important. Labor and Anthony Albanese in particular keeps calling himself, I'm a man of my word. I say, promises made, promises delivered. So you've made this promise about religious freedom. We want to keep reminding the government. This isn't something you could say and walk away from. This was a core thing. It could well have affected a lot of the people who voted for you, who changed their vote, and now you're going to have to keep it. So one of the really effective ways of doing that is just to be throwing your name on the petition, adding your name to the thousands of people who already have, and saying, I too want you to keep your word.
Mike, just for those who might be thinking, oh, that religious freedom thing, that's just about churches doing nice things behind their walls. Let's just talk about the place of religious freedom for a few moments, in amongst all of the freedoms that are at risk of being taken down by some, you might even say, mistaken legislation, thinking that someone's doing something nice for one group and actually taking down the rest. I wonder if you've got any thoughts here for listeners, and we'll come back to the petition too, but who might sign this petition? People who are just interested in things about the church, or people who are actually interested, whether you're even Christian or not, about the freedoms that we already have had in Australia and that we might see right now as being highly at risk.
Yes. So, religious freedom is, broadly speaking, just the ability for us to be able to live out our faith. But that breaks down to a lot of other freedoms. The ability to say what we believe in public, to be able to teach what we believe to our kids and in our churches, to be able to disagree with each other and say, no, you're wrong. The Bible says this, and what you're saying is actually wrong. The ability to disagree with people on how they live their lives, whether it be matters of how they spend their money or on matters of gender and sexuality, all sorts of things. So our ability to speak and express our faith in its strongest terms is a key part of religious freedom. And historically, that was actually the start of all forms of freedom of conscience, freedom of speech. It all came out of debates about, can people have their own religion? So that's all your individual rights. But on the other side, when we express our faith, we do it together. We come together for church. We meet together. We create institutions like churches, like schools, like charities, to express our faith in one way or another. And those institutions also have to be able to operate according to our faith. And the real crunch point of that is they need to be able to employ people who uphold that faith. That means be able to say, even down to our ground for people who have Christian faith. Christian hospitals, Christian charities say we want to be able to operate according to what we believe. And that includes having staff who, at the very least, don't undermine our religious principles. So it's a very big concept, but you can boil it down to the individual and the organisational rights. And that's how the petition puts it down, as two separate clauses.
And for the PM, as you say, there needs to be a constant and continual, and let's bring the issue around again, a reminder of the commitments that have been made. And so when Albo says that he wants to balance progressive and moderate views to make the Labor Party centrist, those progressive views, they're probably the ones who are going to be anti-Christian and anti-religious freedom. The moderate views, they might even be sort of almost leaning that way as well. It's not like there's no conservative views in the Labor Party. It's either progressive and moderate. That's what they talk about. So the constant reminder is so important. That's why this petition, I guess, is going to be one of the planks of keeping that before the eyes of those MPs who are in the Labor Party and, of course, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
Yes, it is important to note that there are a significant, it's small, but a significant group of MPs who are conservative on issues of religious freedom in particular. And a lot of them come from a Catholic foundation, but we've also got a growing Muslim group inside Labor who want to be able to uphold their religious freedom too. So there is a voice in Labor advocating for religious freedom. And the other thing that's very important to remember is that the reason that politicians keep promises, it's not actually because they want to be somebody who kept their promise. I mean, a lot of them, they don't want to break their promise, but really the thing that drives them is votes. If there are votes in it to keep your promise, then that promise keeps getting kept. If it turns out, say with the stage 3 tax cuts, that they realise that there are more votes in doing something different, they'll change their mind. And both parties are the same. So we need to keep reminding them there are a large number of people out there who heard you make this promise, who are judging you on this promise, and whose votes could be influenced in the next election by how you keep this promise.
Before we dive into some other deep issues, A text here from James in Kyabram. Mike, James says, my concern is in the boxing in of all religions where terrorists are not exempt to consider their plight, or in brackets their fight, with the freedom of others. Maybe a differentiation between violence and the peacemaker in the faith proposed to the government. Now, I'm not sure what you make of that, but I think the fact that when we're talking about Christian religious freedom, we're also talking about religious freedom for others who don't always have the best interests of their foes at heart. What are your thoughts here for James?
So religious freedom does cover all faiths, and historically all faiths have had some extremists and some violent elements to them. We've actually, over the past year, we're working with the federal government on hate speech legislation, and particularly there is legislation now which makes it illegal to incite violence against people of another faith, or just in general. So religious freedom does not extend to being able to preach violence, preach death, those sorts of things against another person, whether of another faith or otherwise. So the sorts of religious freedom we're talking about does not protect the terrorists, does not protect the extremists of any faith. Instead, it protects the average preacher just saying Jesus is the only way to God, that people who believe differently are not followers of God, or people who live certain ways are not following how the Bible is teaching for them to be. That's what we're trying to protect.
Yes, and wonderful to talk about what that freedom really means. Hey, 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. We've been talking about what's happening federally, and just hearkening back to what you were saying a little earlier, now that the federal election, the dust is settling on that, and yes, there's a program in place, and 18 months is going to be very important. The Labor Party has made commitments to religious freedom. Those sorts of things, very, very important. But now there's some focus that turns to the states, with elections coming in Victoria and New South Wales. What's on your agenda for getting a focus there, Mike?
Yeah, so I think the Victorian election is going to be one of the most critical elections in Australia for quite some time. Victoria has had a unchallenged Labor government for quite a long time. And now I don't believe that Labor governments in and of themselves are a risk to religious freedom, but I do believe that Labor governments who don't have a strong opposition against them can tend towards becoming far more progressive and far more aggressive against religious freedom. So Victoria has been the perfect example of that. Pretty much every terrible idea that has been implemented in states around Australia that have attacked religious freedom started first in Victoria. So we're coming up in 18 months' time. In November next year will be the Victorian state election, and the polls are starting to say that it's going to be very, very close. The Liberal Party still are in somewhat disarray in their campaigning capability. Labor is taking a significant hit, although the federal election has shown that maybe not as big a hit as we thought. But this election is our opportunity in a government who will be struggling to survive, an opposition who will be fighting to get power, for us to say, hi, Christians in particular, there's a lot of us. We're spread out in all those marginal seats, and we have got significant concerns. What commitments will you make for us? What parts of these terrible bills that have been passed are you going to fix? What are you going to roll back if you get into power? So this election will actually be very important to start to see the tide turning in the opposite direction and start moving back towards the protection of religious freedom in Victoria.
Should we expect that Freedom for Faith will be seeking similar sorts of commitments at state level as what you've sought at federal before the federal election on these issues of freedoms?
Absolutely. We will be engaging with both parties to explain with them what our concerns are. But as we keep saying, the muscle in politics doesn't come from some archbishop meeting with a premier. It comes with hundreds and thousands of Christians talking to and writing to and meeting with their local MP and saying, hi, we're in your electorate. we're going to be voting and we're concerned about this. So we will be helping churches run candidate forums throughout Victoria to be reinforcing our requests, giving both parties the opportunity to be making commitments. We'll be running letter-writing campaigns leading up to the election so that MPs are very aware there are lots of people in their electorate who are worried about these issues.
Mike, you give a lot of confidence to the Christian believer who says, there needs to be a multi-front battle that's going on, and freedom for faith certainly becoming very well established, and not just when it comes to, being in the corridors of power and talking to the MPs who are important around issues of freedom, but also working with the churches. And sometimes we get caught up in our own little denominational focus and lose sight of the fact that the church is actually huge. It's very large, much, much bigger than anyone really actually anticipates, because sometimes you're hearing about census and things like that, but the church is huge and ought to have a united front. You're working with churches in a very substantial way and bringing some of that unity together.
Well, I think the census is a very unhelpful measure. There's lots of people who just tick, oh yeah, I'm Christian. Okay, so that number of people who are randomly ticking Christian, that's going down. But the National Church Life Survey is a very valuable measure, and it actually does a census itself of churches. And it estimates that 15% of Australians are regularly attending a church service. 15% is about the same rate as union membership in Australia. So that is a huge percentage of voters who are not just saying, yeah, I'm Christian, but who are regularly going to their church service. And so Freedom for Faith are all about partnering with denominations, partnering with churches to unlock that powerful 15% of voters and show them how you can engage in politics in a non-partisan way. You don't have to love one party and hate the other, and you can do it in a godly Christian way, the way that Jesus would do it, and still be very effective in getting political wins. And so it is my great privilege to work with the leaders of all the major Protestant denominations, to work with the offices of Catholic and Anglican archbishops across the country. And there is a real unity amongst all the Christian denominations saying, we disagree on this issue theologically and that issue, but we really do want to work together on the religious freedom, on our ability to hold to what we believe, and indeed our ability to disagree on those things that we disagree on. It's a really exciting unity. It is a great privilege to be part of that.
And you know what? If there's something very heartening about the numbers of believers in Australia, and as you say, 15%, the National Church Life Survey puts that number at, the latest undercurrents of faith from the McCrindle research people are saying that 15% may actually have grown to 20%. There's a lot more people engaging with church today than you might anticipate. And if you make that 20%, that can actually number in the vicinity of around 5 million. The numbers of believers is increasing. So uniting the leadership around that is going to be very, very important. Hey, there are some states that work better than others where leaders come together. Have you got any impression as you think about all the states, whether it's Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, WA, or the territories, churches working together and leaders that are thinking about these sorts of issues? What comes to mind for you?
I have to say that the gold standard for churches working together is New South Wales. There's a long history of all the major denominations working together, coordinating to talk with government. And in fact, that has resulted, the government recognised that level of coordination, and they have created their own Faith Affairs Council, which is recognised by the government, and the government listens to them, which has got representatives of all the major Christian denominations as well as the other major faiths. But New South Wales has been working very well in faith leaders and has been in the dying government, and when they're bringing up their anti-discrimination legislation and the Respect at Work legislation, the church has really started to realise we've got to work together. And a little bit consciously picked up some of the lessons that New South Wales has learned about working together, and they've been doing a very, very good job as well. I'm hoping to see this sort of pattern working its way out into the other states. And some other states, sometimes it's hard work to get church leaders together.
Okay, so in New South Wales, it's called the Faith Affairs Council, and you'd like to see some more of those becoming effective. That's state level. Is there something that's like that works at federal level?
Well, at federal level, the senior faith leaders, again, work together very, very closely. Australia being what it is, the overlap between who are the senior faith leaders federally and who they are in New South Wales tends to be, there's quite a strong overlap. But again, the Catholics and the Anglicans, Baptists, Presbyterians, ACC, all the leading Protestant denominations work together very well and speak to government. But we don't have that formal structure like we do in New South Wales, that faith. That would be a ring for the federal government to start thinking about, is how to listen to faith leaders in a coordinated and structured way, rather than what happens at the moment is we go off and have our meetings with faith leaders, figure out what our lobbying strategy is, and then we go and we push and we lobby with government. In New South Wales, the government actually calls the meeting, brings people together, says, this is legislation that's coming up. What do you think about it? What feedback do you have? And that's been very effective. Some really good improvements to legislation have happened even before that legislation has hit the light of day.
Okay, lots of improvements still to be made, by way of which our church leaders actually communicate the issues of faith to government. Taking calls, 1800 316 316. Let's hear from Mick in Nambucca Heads in New South Wales. Hey, Mick, thanks for waiting patiently. What are your thoughts?
That's right, yes. Good points. And two things. Number one, all the best with getting the federal government on. It's great for the states, and it's a really good thing that's happening through the states in New South Wales. And I live in New South Wales, but I was born in Victoria. And when in the 70s, woke ideology and all what we call woke now and all sorts of progressive stupidity come out of the universities, and that's why Victoria's like it is. They had a loud voice back then, and it's just flowed on to now, and so it's tipped the scales big time in Victoria. New South Wales people are probably a bit more sensible. The second thing is that some Christians think that the world's going to hell in a handbasket, so, why polish the brass on a sinking ship? That's not the right attitude. It's Christians want to see good progression with Christianity in our country, and it can happen through contact that your guest is doing. It's great. It's really good. Okay,
and some might be thinking you just put a bit of a wedge there between the intelligence of people in Victoria and those in New South Wales. But beyond that, what are your thoughts here for Mick? On these sorts of issues here, Mike?
I've got a good friend who's an MP in New South Wales Labor who's got his own views about the intelligence difference between New South Wales Labor and Victorian Labor, that's for sure. I completely agree with you, Mick. There's a group of people who think it's all done, we've lost, it's time for us to go into our holy huddle. And I recall about 2 years ago, when New South Wales started discussing we are going to be doing our own conversion therapy legislation. Victoria had already done it. New South Wales government was saying we're going to be doing something like this. I remember being told by very senior Christian activists, you're going to get steamrolled. It's going to be worse than Victoria because that's the progression. It's always going to be worse. It's always going to be worse. And we worked hard for 18 months and thousands and thousands of emails were written to MPs, and we ran candidate forums for the New South Wales election. And the legislation that New South Wales came up with was, it's not great, but it's a whole lot better than the Victorian legislation. This past year, just quietly, South Australia implemented their own conversion therapy legislation, and they took the New South Wales model and they improved it further. we are actually seeing a reversing of the tide on issues like conversion therapy. It's not that things are getting worse and worse. In fact, legislation is slowly getting better and better, and that's because we can make a difference. You're right, Mick. If we get in there and do the work, this isn't just polishing the brass on the sinking Titanic. We really can make a difference to our community and to our government.
Mick, anything further to add?
No, that's good, and I'm glad Mike is taking that position. It's really good. I suppose South Australia used to be hot on the heels of Victoria when it comes to sort of so-called progressive understanding of life and everything, and they do separate it between the educated and the uneducated. So anyone who doesn't agree with them is uneducated, and everybody who agrees with them is educated, and it's just ridiculous, And it's come out of those universities originally. Well, at least they support. I don't know if it originates there, but they support. They're socially active all the time because young people at universities want to change the world. So they come up with all these big new ideas, and anyone who doesn't agree with them is uneducated and hasn't been to university. And it's just an atrocious gap between the young and the old. The old people are saying, no, we're not having that.
Mick, you're making some good points here. I'm going to let you go because we're running short of time. Mick, thank you so much for your call. I want to squeeze in one more call. Helen is in Cairns. Hi, Helen. Need to be quick, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I'm just wondering what Mike could tell me about what's happening in New South Wales at the moment. If they've got such a good relationship with the government, why is this terrible bill in the offing about taking away conscientious rights as regards to abortion?
Yes, that's it's a slightly different topic, but yes, it's something similar in all of these things. Thoughts here, Mike?
The thoughts are, last night in the Legislative Council, every one of the clauses that was getting rid of religious conscientious objection were removed from the bill. So we've been working with the government quite behind the scenes ever since the Greens. This is the bill the Greens introduced that would have stripped religious conscientious objection around abortion, both for individuals and for institutions. It had to go through the legislative process to see what happened, but the government did what they had quietly committed to us that they would do, and they stripped all those provisions out last night. Now, there is still the bit of the bill which allows nurse practitioners to provide abortion medication, and that's an ongoing fight for the pro-life lobby. But we did get rid of every single threat to religious freedom in that bill.
That's
Helen,
so good to hear. Yeah.
It is good news, isn't it? Helen, thank you so much for your call. Time's running out. I don't want to leave us with dangling in any way, because when we talk about what's going on, we've got to be able to have some way of taking some action. And so come back to this petition that you've got going. Mike, listeners to our conversation right now can take action today. When they sign this petition, what are they signing?
You're signing a commitment, a request to Anthony Albanese to keep the promises that he made on protecting religious freedom, particularly the individual right for us to proclaim and live our faith, and the organisational right for our schools, our churches, our charities to operate according to our faith.
Okay, Mike, we've got to leave our conversation here, but I want to thank you so much for taking some time to update our listeners and give us something of what I think we could call as a progress report on what's happening with freedoms in Australia. And yes, the Albanese government is They are continuing with a majority. There's still a Greens solid crossbench, and they could do whatever they wanted to do with religious freedoms, and they could deliver us from those, but without some sort of united approach from church leaders and from people who are just like you and I, people who are ordinary Christian believers who believe that there is something so special about all of the freedoms that we enjoy here in Australia. Those could very easily be taken away from us. So take the opportunity to visit the website, freedomforfaith.org.au. You'll be able to sign that petition today, and of course there's going to be email email campaigns and all sorts of things. You might want to be signed up to whatever subscriber opportunity you have for Freedom for Faith. And just to mention, no doubt, there's probably some financial need as well. So be mindful if there is a donate button. Mike Southon, always really enjoy your updates. Such clarity. Wonderful to have you on 2020. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Neil. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.